Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our council meeting of Wednesday the 7th of April 2021. Apologies for a little bit of a lateness in start, we're just a few technical issues there. Just want to welcome everybody here, councillors, staff and public. Just want to acknowledge that the meeting is being recorded, be on our council website. And we just have the health and safety procedures on the screen. Obviously, our emergency exits are listed with our green signs, and we evacuate into the assembly area next to the clock tower. Health and safety wise, obviously the building is a non-smoking facility. There is a defibrillator located at the front of house. And if there are any issues, please report it to the committee administrator. Because we are online, if you could just say your name as you speak, and ask all presenters to do that, please. Right, so we'll go through our agenda paper, and apologies, I have none. None have been signalled to me. Are there any early departures? There being none signalled, so we'll move on to notification of additional items. I don't have any, I haven't been notified, so we'll move on to number 3, declarations of interest, if any. Councillor Hancock.
I just want to note that I may have a declaration of interest just on item 521, item 19, just in relation to the local alcohol policy, should that matter sort of come under some sort of debate. Thank you.
And Councillor Harper.
Similar, I'll be declaring interest in the same item.
Great, thank you. All right, moving through to confirmation of minutes. Number 4 on our order paper, the minutes of our ordinary meeting, part 1 public and part 2 confidential, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any matters arising. If there are none, I'll ask you to vote, please. And that is passed unanimously, thank you. We'll just, Councillor Dennison, if we can just get your technology sorted there. Right, moving on to the reports. Number 5 is the adoption of the annual report, and this is 2019-20. There's a memo there on page 21. From our Chief Financial Officer. I'll just ask Stuart to highlight anything there. We'll take that as being read. I'd just like to welcome, I wasn't sure if you were in the building. Welcome Debbie Pereira, who's our Audit New Zealand Director. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you, and good morning to us all. Present to you the Council's annual report for the 1920 year. I don't have a presentation or a long speech, but clearly I have our Audit Director beside me, and so I thought I would take this opportunity to let her speak about their opinion.
Make sure you can hear me. All right, thank you, and it is my pleasure to be here today. So the adoption of the 2020 annual report is a little bit delayed this year, and this is partly due to COVID and partly due to the revaluation of infrastructure assets. The infrastructure assets themselves are a huge portion of what makes up your annual report. The total assets of council is $1.8 billion and your infrastructure assets are $1.4 billion. So it was important that, that they were correctly valued, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. Excuse me. I'd also just like to acknowledge when you sit here today and you look at the size of this annual report, it is a really big document, and anyone that's familiar with annual reports in private sector will know that they're not as big as this. And this is because there is a lot of requirements that council are required to comply with. Local Government Act, there's Schedule 10, there's financial prudence regulations, regulations from the DIA, as well as the accounting standards. So I just did want to acknowledge that. And I suppose the other thing is that council does have a lot of activities, so it is a big document. So our opinion does cover two aspects of this annual report. One is the financial aspects and all the legislative requirements that go with that. And the second part is the non-financial, which is your reporting against what you said that you're going to do. So it's not the finances, but it is your actions. So I'm pleased to say that I'm in a position to issue an unqualified audit report over the financial statements of council. And this includes all the disclosures that you're required to make under those regulations. And in terms of your non-financial performance, we have got a modification over two of the performance measures. So the rest of the performance measures we're satisfied with, but there are two measures that we couldn't get enough information, so it is really an except for, or limitation of scope opinion, and that is around the number of complaints that council has received in regards to wastewater, stormwater and water. And that's a requirement of the regulations, the DIA mandatory performance measures. You're not the only council that has this qualification. I think there's quite a few councils around the country where perhaps an interpretation of the requirements has since been clarified. And so we did look to see if there were some additional work that we could do to gain assurance over the number. But there weren't systems in place to be able to record what the subsequent complaints were. So it's effectively a limitation of scope. The second part of the qualification is around the response times. So there were some system limitations around that too. So we looked to see whether we could do any further work, but we couldn't. So we just make note of that in the audit opinion. We have also notified that there's an emphasis of matter around COVID-19, and that emphasis of matter is for all entities. Just acknowledging that it was an unusual year, the 1920 year. There was a big impact with the lockdowns, and we look to see that council has appropriately disclosed the impacts of those, and we're satisfied with that. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments that anyone might have about the audit.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. We have a couple of councillors. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you. Yeah, could you, with the reporting as far as wastewater and stormwater, etc. goes, has anything been put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen next year?
I believe the answer is yes.
Okay.
So it was a recording of volumes of calls was the issue, and we've changed our processes to collect that information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor, the auditor and I have had a difference of opinion, as most mayors around New Zealand have on this subject, and it is an interpretation. But we are complying with the new interpretation that we've been given of what we should be doing. So it was a matter of most of the cities around New Zealand and the Slower North Island complying with that. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Debbie. Debbie, so the interpretation, is this something that's been going on, like, has this suddenly changed what we've, like, are we doing something different, or have we been doing the same thing for the last 10 years and now there's been a change?
Yeah, so nothing has changed in terms of the regulations, but in terms of the focus. And so each year we will have a different focus on what we look at. And in the last couple of years, we have focused on the complaints measures. So we look at the complaints as an indication of the quality of your infrastructure. So if there are a large volume of complaints coming through, then that indicates that perhaps there is a problem. So that is why we have focused on that particular performance measure. And it has become apparent, not every council, but that there are a number of councils who are looking at the very first complaint that came through, as opposed to every complaint for that particular item. There is also a little bit of confusion because the mandatory performance measures do require different things for different measures, and so your response times is to the first complaint, so it's not all the subsequent complaints. And so that is where a lot of that confusion arose. So when you're looking at complaints, the interpretation was that the complaint is the first complaint, whereas the actual DIA advice and their regulations is that it's any complaint to do with water, wastewater, stormwater, and they are quite specific as to what type of complaints. So it's water clarity and taste and odour, for the water side. So yeah, it's probably just had a little bit more of a focus in the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is from Stuart. It's not a question technically about the report. It is about the printing of this report. It says that after it is approved, you are going to print certain number of copies. Obviously, some of these are the legislative requirements. And then it says it will be sent to some of the regular readers. Can't we ask them to read online, considering a big volume of the report? And I'm not sure how big the list is for the regular readers.
Yeah, very good question. And it's definitely a change in focus for us. In the old days, we used to print everything. Modern times, they're online. So we do print some. We need to have a public record of some of them. And some particular audience appreciate a printed copy, but we're certainly not printing volumes and volumes and volumes of it, if that's your question. I don't know the exact number we print, but it's not huge.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Debbie, for the information in the auditor's report. Just wanted to pick up around timing. You did mention that the past year has been rather exceptional, and obviously the timing of receiving this auditor's opinion's been a bit exceptional too. So, looking ahead, is this the new normal in terms of timing, or is there what are we expecting there?
No, this is definitely not the new normal. So with the COVID year, the statutory deadline did get pushed back till the end of December. And I mean, we're now sitting in April, and there were some work that needed to be completed around the infrastructure assets. But the new normal will be back to the 30 November deadline, 31st of October deadline, sorry. Used to be 30 November. So 30 September deadline is for CCOs, and 31st of October is for council. So we are not anticipating that there'll be delays in the 2021 annual report.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. That's our questions. Thank you, Debbie, for your explanation. Thank you, Stuart, for getting us the report. So, councillors, we have two resolutions there, that the annual report 2019-20 and summary annual report 2019-20 be adopted, and to note that the auditor's opinion from Audit New Zealand would be expected to be received immediately following the recommendation adoption by Council on the 7th of April 2021, and that Council signing of the reports. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Great. We will vote, please. And that has passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. We move now to number 6, which is the adoption of the 2021 10-year plan consultation document and supporting material for public consultation. We have a memo there on page 25. I'll ask David Murphy, our GM of Planning, to come forward, and Stuart McKinnon, our CFO. And we have Debbie in the background too, if there are any specific questions around audit. So we'll obviously take all the documentation as being read, David, and Stuart, but if there are any summary comments you want to make?
There are. I've just got a short presentation, if we could just... All right, kia ora koutou, councillors. We've got 4 or 5 slides just to walk you through briefly. Just to recap, remember on the 17th of February, the Committee of Council approved the consultation document and supporting material for audit. So that was that large bulk of information that you receive with all the strategies and all that supporting information that's required to produce the LTP. Audit have reviewed all the documents to ensure they're based on sound information and meet legal requirements, and we just note that this is a requirement under the Local Government Act to proceed with the 10-year plan. We've worked really closely with Debbie and her team over the last 5 weeks or so to refine the consultation document. So Debbie and her team have contributed significantly to the adjustments that have been made along the last 5 weeks or so. Those relate largely to the uncertainties and implications that the council is facing with respect to these projects. So, for instance, Nature Calls, there was a little bit of additional information provided about the options that we're considering, the criteria, and what we will do if it costs more than $350 million. In terms of the water reform, there was some additional text included around the implications of the potential change in this space, or likely change in this space, and the uncertainty in the short to medium term until that change is made. In terms of the asset condition and knowledge regarding our assets, there was a little bit of information added around the risks of the stage approach that council has taken to those increased maintenance budgets. In terms of the capital program deliverability, there was some additional text added around the impact of the central government programs and investment in this region and the impact that's having in terms of the potential for us to deliver our programs. And in terms of external fundraising, there was some additional text added around specifically which programs are reliant on that external funding. As you were advised yesterday, so we received the final audit opinion yesterday afternoon from Debbie and her team. So audit has given the CD an adverse opinion. As indicated on the slides, this is not unexpected, and we've been indicating this throughout the process. It does say that this is not the opinion does say that they audit consider that the CD is not an effective basis for consultation. There's nothing that means this does not mean we cannot consult on the LTP, and our firm advice is that you continue to proceed and approve the CD and the supporting material for consultation. As I said earlier, we've worked closely with Debbie and her team over the last 4 to 5 weeks to refine the CD and the consultation document to talk about all those uncertainties that have led to the adverse opinion. So from our perspective, we've worked very hard to make sure that, I guess, the concerns that Audit New Zealand have regarding those uncertainties are very clear in the consultation document. One thing I would also add is that for the first 3 years, we do meet all the expectations on us in terms of the ability to fund and to deliver the plan. And as you all know, at the end of that 3 years, we get to do another 10-year plan, or potentially we get to do an amendment prior to that if the uncertainties that we're all aware of come to fruition. So there's an opportunity to change the plan as we go. I guess the other thing is, one of the things we bear in mind is that, you know, this council, like a number of councils, is facing a huge amount of expectations that are being placed on it from various, regional and central government requirements that have led to the plan that's in front of you today. So, you know, big picture messages from the government and the regional council are that we address water quality. that we invest in the city post-COVID-19 to help with the economic recovery, there's a statutory requirement to plan for growth and 20% over and above our projections. And we must have, and the direction was that we assume that Three Waters continues to be our asset. So all of those things are aspects that you know well we have to weigh up in terms of the way in which we've produced the plan. The adverse opinion, I guess in summary, is because we cannot comply with our debt limit set by the financial strategy, predominantly due to the significant borrowing from Nature Calls. Again, I reiterate, that can be reviewed within the 3-year timeframe when we have to produce a new plan or do an amendment, as we get more direction from government around the water reforms. Audit considered that the council should have looked at reducing levels of service, removing or deferring projects, or raising rates further. Again, I sound like a little bit like a broken record, but those are all things that the council can do if it chooses to do an amendment to the LTP or produces a new or when it produces a new LTP in 3 years. I'm not sure the government would expect this council to effectively shut down the city to keep funding available for a Nature Calls project that it's indicating it will deliver should the legislation change. So our approach, or the recommended approach, is to keep maintaining and investing in the city while the uncertainties about the Three Waters reform and Nature Calls are worked through. As I've said 3 or 4 times now, this will be done by the next 10-year plan. Until then, the proposed plan is sustainable in those first 3 years, and we can generally live within our borrowing limits if the reforms go ahead as proposed. There's some consultation to come, so there will be a 10-year plan launch. So the invitations went out for that last week. There will primarily be an online submission process. There'll also be some postcard-style submission forms for those people that just want to send in a very quick, short message. There'll be a summary document sent to all households, and that will be shared with all elected members for feedback before it's finalised. It will be a very short time frame to finalise that. There'll be the usual radio, print, social media. We're going to engage with some schools as best we can. There'll be joint opportunities to consult alongside the Nature Calls project, and there'll be some sector forum groups. And to date, we have sessions confirmed with the Chamber of Commerce, the Arts Sector, Sport Manawatu, the Community Services Council and E&M. So these events are in the global diary, and any further ones that are confirmed will be added and you'll be advised of that. So I guess in summary, despite the opinion, our recommendation is that the Council proceeds with consultation on the consultation document, and obviously during the next 18 months to 3 years monitors closely the government reform and what that means for the way we deliver our services. So happy to answer any questions. Yeah. I'm just going to invite Debbie if there's anything she would like to add before we answer any questions.
Thank you. I do just want to sort of run through just a couple of things, and I do want to acknowledge the incredible decision that Council has had to make around this long-term plan. This is probably one of the hardest ones that you've had to make, and I know that there's been a lot of workshops and a lot of work with management, and I also do want to acknowledge the communication, and we started in November 2019 talking about this, and there has been a lot of angst around how this is going to be presented. So I just did want to acknowledge that. So as David mentioned, the opinion is an adverse opinion. We thought long and hard about this, and it wasn't. It's not just me coming up with that decision. I do have a panel of people through the Office of the Auditor General as well that takes a look at this. And effectively, because we're looking at a 10-year plan, and our opinion is over that 10 years, when we looked at the borrowing that you were going to have to incur over that 10 years and your ability or inability to borrow, we had no choice but to issue an adverse opinion. I also just wanted to just run through, there's quite a lot of work that goes in behind, behind the audit and dealing with, with management. So some of the areas that we really looked at were what were called the 5 Cs. Excuse me. So the 5 Cs are, sorry, I've had a bit of asthma. Oh, thank you. So the five Cs are, the first one is COVID-19. And so effectively we're really looking at what assumptions have you made in the long-term plan and the underlying information around COVID, and is it clearly described? So we had no concerns around that. Climate change is another big focus this is for all councils, and so we have reviewed your assumptions and we have reviewed what you have disclosed in the long-term plan, and we were satisfied with those. A third C is the consultation document itself, which we have talked about. And then the last two are around the condition of the assets and what we term capital doability. So in terms of the condition of the assets, Council has been really honest in knowing that there is some gaps in the knowledge that you have. There is also a lot of work that has been going on to fill those gaps and to look at the levels of renewals that you have in your long-term plan. The capital doability is one that we have looked at, and we've looked at how you've staged your capital program. You have a significant increase in your capital program over the 10 years. I think it is about $1.4 billion, which is quite significant considering your infrastructure assets are worth that at the moment. And we know that historically, we also look at the council's performance over the last few years in terms of how you've delivered on your capital program, and there has been a big step up in that, and there's been a lot of work around getting council to that point. So when we looked at that, we were satisfied that what you had budgeted and where you had been, acknowledging the wastewater treatment plant is a big item, and that is in years, the outer years. We didn't have any concerns around how you had budgeted for it. We did consider that there is a risk from external contractors, and particularly in the Manawatu market with the Manawatu Gorge and the pressure on the contractors. So when we were considering it, we acknowledged that perhaps there's pressures from outside of council that could impact on it, but we didn't have any concerns from inside of council. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have around the audit.
Yeah, before I just pass to the councillors, Debbie, would it be fair to say, and I understand you're in a difficult position as well, being able to give an opinion on this, and it is over 10 years, but your opinion over 3 years, the opinion would be quite different, wouldn't it?
That's right. If we were looking at the document for 3 years, then, so the issue that we're faced with is that you have a financial strategy, and we reviewed that, and we were quite comfortable that it was a prudent financial strategy. It was the application of that financial strategy that was causing the issue. So in the first 3 years, you are within that, within your strategy. So if we were giving an opinion over a 3-year plan, then that would be the case. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah. Okay. And just your comments around contractor availability, and bearing in mind that this would probably be New Zealand's biggest regional waters project, it would require more than just Manawatu contractors. I'd say it'd probably have international contractors. Would that not be right?
Yes, so I would agree with that. Yep.
Good. All right, Councillor Johnson.
Mr Mayor, a question for the auditor and a question about the consultation document, just a small thing. So, Debbie, thank you for your comments. Can you give us a bit of perspective on a national level about how other councils are dealing with the uncertainty around Three Waters? And, just try and give us some national context, because obviously we just have our own context here.
So every council has the same assumption in their consultation document that you will continue with the three waters, but every council also has has a disclosure in their consultation document that that it's all unknown, and so therefore there is uncertainty. And every council, apart from the regional councils, also has an emphasis of matter, what we call emphasis of matter in the opinion, around referring the reader to the fact that there is this uncertainty. In terms of how, from a national perspective, a lot of councils are now actually acknowledging that there has been a lack of investment in infrastructure, particularly around the three waters, and are facing a backlog. And so there are varying disclosures in their reports and in their audit opinions. There are some councils that also are facing the fact that they don't know. So depending on the circumstances, but everyone is assuming at the moment that in their LTP that the waters are in, with the knowledge that they're likely to be out. So it's a very unusual situation for all councils. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then there's just a question, it's very detailed, sorry, about the consultation document itself, which refers to page 333 of the attachment, and it's around the programmes for connected communities, and there's a list of the, in inverted commas, new programmes that are happening, and I'll just wait till you get to that page.
Which page of the CD is it?
It's, of the CD, it's page 46 of the CD, I think. It's page 333 on our agenda paper. Is that right? Yeah, you got it? So on there we've got programmes 1564 and 1565, described as increasing community grants and investment 924,000 over 10 years. Now, I did raise this previously in a discussion, but that is not an increase on current levels. The increase referred to the last 10-year plan when it was an increase, but what it is now is a maintenance of the current levels. So I feel it might be a bit misleading to the community to describe it as an increase, because those two programmes refer to additional monies, as far as I'm aware, that Council put in the long-term plan in 2018. And so having it described there as an increase may give the impression that we're adding money to the community budget compared to what we had 3 years ago, but it isn't actually an addition. Am I making sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And I agree with you. And I think we, in response to that, we'll take the opportunity under recommendation number 3 to make some minor amendments to that comment.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and much as Councillor Johnson, one question for the auditor and one minor question for staff. Debbie, just around the 5 Cs, I was quite interested in that aspect, and you indicated that climate change was one of those aspects. Can you just give us a bit more perspective around that? When did that become part of audit's formal assessments, and sort of what process and what standards might be in there?
Sure. So after the last long-term plan, there was a bit of an overview of all councils, and it was identified that climate change had not really been addressed in terms of what impact it might have for the councils and over the 10-year plan. I think the assumption was that it was going to be beyond the 10 years. And so this time round, we have been given instruction from the Office of the Auditor General to ensure that climate change is actually addressed and that Council has looked at what impacts that may have. So we're really looking at it from a underlying information. What does Council need to put into their budgets, or what does council need to start thinking about? What sort of assumptions should you be putting in? And it could be around increased levels of rainfall, which could have increase in storm water or drainage issues for council. For those that are coastal, there are coastal issues. So we're really looking to see what has council done, what thinking has happened behind that, and have you appropriately considered that in your long-term plan?
So does that take the form of sort of written guidance that you're operating from, and is that guidance shared and available to councils, including ours?
We do have some guidance. I don't know if it's available to be shared, but it's really, I suppose it's guidance from the Auditor General to us as auditors as to what we should be looking for, and have you been doing the thinking around it? Yeah.
Great. And finally then, can I just clarify, because quite a few of your examples spoke more to adaptation than to mitigation.
Yes.
Are you looking at both sides of the coin?
Yeah, we do look at both sides, and whether council has looked at the mitigation side as well as the adaptation, and whether there's an impact over this 10 years for the mitigation. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Just in the consultation document, my question arises on page 72 of the consultation document, which is the list of programs that were considered but not included. My understanding from our workshop process was that we had a good discussion around the potential for including free buses for seniors on this list of items that were considered but not included. And I didn't see it appear there, so I just wanted to check in from an officer's point of view, your understanding of the status of that and what we might expect.
Yeah, our recollection of the conversation was that we agreed to put in, and there is some material in the CD about how we could encourage or promote more use of public transport by seniors. But I guess in short, we're happy to add the program that was talked about into the list on page 72. I guess the reason why it's just not there is I think it was a proposal put forward at the workshop rather than a program that was prepared and then considered. So it's this slight differentiation, but we can certainly add it to page 72 alongside some as a program or initiative that the council considered but didn't fund. But there is also some commentary about how we can promote greater uptake of the bus.
Great, thank you, that's acknowledged. And just to clarify, can is the same as will?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both. Just a couple of questions, really. The first one, on page 75 of the consultation document, or 362 of our papers, at the very top of that page, it's got a statement, the third line down, overall there have been no significant changes in the level of service council is providing. And I'm just wondering, I'll just move to page 65 or 352 of our document, and those pie charts, which are really quite useful to demonstrate where our money, what our money is being spent on. The pink section in that left pie of 32% relates to capital expenditure to improve the level of service. And I'm just wondering if those two statements are a little bit inconsistent.
I guess typically the capital expenditure is capital new, so it's funding a new facility, whereas I think the commentary on page 75 is more about the day-to-day levels of service provided by the council, that there's no change to those.
Okay, So, okay, I'll leave that there for now. Just moving to my second point that I was interested to get clarification, particularly from you, Debbie, and you've talked about the fact that we can't comply with our debt levels, and it's been outlined in the presentation and in the consultation document repeatedly, that is being attributed predominantly due to nature calls, which is about 350 million, which is about a quarter of our overall capital spend. I guess what I'm interested to know is that is it a reasonable thing to attribute the lack of complying with LGFA rules and with our debt levels to one program, even though I acknowledge it's the biggest program in there, but in terms of the accumulative effect of the other $1.15 billion worth of capital new, it doesn't. The commentary doesn't seem to acknowledge the accumulative effect of that, despite the fact that around just under a third of that is capital new programs that we effectively do have some choice about.
Yeah, sure. So what we did as part of our audit is we mapped out the capital spend, and then we also took out we're really looking at the debt associated with that capital spend. And so we took out the nature calls part of it, and what we found is that you will still breach some of your self-imposed debt levels. So you've got a policy to not go over 200% of your revenue. So in year 4 or 5, I think it is, you will actually go over that 200%. I might actually have it with me, in terms of the total number, but the LGFA borrowing allows you to borrow up to 300%, so you do actually have an extra 100% buffer. So when we are looking at taking out I'll just see if I can find it. When we're looking at taking out the debt associated with the nature calls, it was predominantly that debt that puts you into the position to not actually be able to secure the borrowing. And you say, I think it's on page 64, or it was on 64 of my documents that I had, there is a commentary that no bank would borrow, or would lend to you based on those ratios, and we agreed with that. So while there is a significant amount of capital spend, some of that is through rates in terms of renewals, and some of that is through borrowing, but it's really that borrowing for nature calls that tipped you over the limit in terms of what you could actually source from external entities.
Okay, so just moving to page 2 of the consultation document, which I think is page 292 of our papers. The statement at the top of that page, once again, it's attributing, it says without nature calls our borrowing would be sustainable. When we asked officers a month or so back, they said that we'd need to take 500 million out of the budget in order for it to be sustainable. So even to take nature's calls out, I guess understanding that advice to us that wouldn't be sustainable, given that, is it still reasonable just to simply blame one essential program as opposed to other programs?
So we have actually had some conversations around that particular statement, and to actually make it clear that it is that you'll still be breaching your own limits. In terms of the comment around the sustainability, was around the levels that you could actually borrow. So because the LGFA allows you to borrow up to 300%, you will be within that cap. I have actually found on my page now the debt to revenue ratios without nature calls, and so you really peak in 2029-30, which is year 9, where you're sitting at 258% of debt to your net revenue. So you still do have a buffer in terms of LGFA, but in terms of your own policy, you start to breach in year 4 when you start to get over the 200%. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Debbie, just on the councillor's questions there, I just note on page, because we talk about, and we're very, some of us are very selective in what we call nature calls, but I note on page 59 and 16, I've just done a rough add up, there's nearly $50 million worth of other waters infrastructure work as well. Would that be fair?
Yes, that would be fair. Yep. There is a backlog of work that needs to be done, and there's also growth within the city. So, yeah.
And we don't stop, even with knowing what's happening year 4, year 5, year 6. Yep. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's just a follow-up question, probably to staff, I suppose, following on from Councillor Naylor's comments, questions, and the auditor's responses. My understanding is that the financial strategy can be changed by us with consultation. And so the fact that we're breaching our own financial limits in the outer years of the plan is something that we ourselves could alter, that the limiting factor in all of this is really the local government financing. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So the limiting factor is really, can you get the borrowing that you are planning for? And that's the bit where that's causing the grief. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, are there any more questions of Debbie or the officers? There doesn't seem to be. Thank you. All right, councillors, we have the resolutions there. I'll read them out for purposes of the meeting. That the adoption of the 2021 10-year plan, consultation document and supporting material for consultation, that Council resolves, one, that the supporting material as considered by the Committee of Council on the 17th of February 2021 and subsequently amended through the audit process be adopted for consultation. Number 2, that the audited consultation document for the proposed 10-year plan 2021 to 31 be adopted for consultation. That the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Chief Executive be delegated authority to make minor amendments to the 2021 10-year plan consultation document and supporting material. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments, and I may just start. Look, I just want to acknowledge everybody that's been involved in this unusual process, because councillors, we really know that this is a 3-year LTP, and I appreciate audit's professional advice around that they have to look at this as a 10-year plan. But we heard by some of the questions that if it was 3 years, we are certainly acting within all our means. What is certain, I mean, Three Waters will not be our asset. We know that. I mean, the councillors and most of you did attend the DIA workshop, local government workshop just recently, and we were told that won't be our assets. And we won't be building this new facility. So the LTP, I hate to say it, but it's somewhat of a Clayton's LTP. In the first 3 years, we are compliant. We meet the government, our own regulations, our own financial expectations. What is uncertain is the timing of these government reforms. And I do feel for Audit New Zealand, who have to give us, and they have no choice but to give us an adverse opinion. Look, we expected that. We know that as councillors, that we just have to take that on the chin. I'll leave my comments really at that, because I think the officers have really done a good, they've outlined our approach well, and I do want to acknowledge the work that's gone in by everybody in the background. What would have been quite good for the government to have really either acted quicker in terms of what are we doing with our waters assets, or asked local government as a sector to delay our LTPs perhaps for another year until Cabinet had decided what they were doing with our assets, because it does become very, very difficult in understanding where they sit. Anyway, as councillors, I know you're all well over this subject. I think we're probably one of the leading councils in New Zealand understanding this complex issue. So thank you, and I'd like you to support the recommendations there. I'll open it up for any other comments. Councillor Johnson, I can see you trying to flicker there.
Yes, sorry, the machinery's not quite working this morning. Just the comment that I wanted to make is that I think the comments that staff made around what the expectations are from the community and from the government regarding the uncertainty that we find ourselves in are actually the things that we need to keep in mind here, which is that there's certainly an expectation that we don't suddenly go into some kind of cutting and chopping mode, destroying our local economy, reducing services, putting rates up and all the rest of it, just to make the numbers add up in a plan that we all know is not actually a plan for 10 years at all, because we don't have the certainty. So I think that that was a very good point, well made. And we've known for some time, probably 18 months, that this would be the situation today, that when we put in our Three Waters renewals that we have to do, that the plan would not meet audit requirement. And so I don't think, councillors, you should feel fazed at all by that. We have a perfectly sustainable plan for the next 3 years. We have the opportunity to do another 10-year plan next year or at any other time before the 3 years are up, once we know what the certainty of the situation is. So I think we just need to steel ourselves and get on with it, really.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be able to support these recommendations. I think there's very sobering words in the auditor's report that says that we do not have a credible plan for funding all our activities, and because of the unreasonable underlying information and assumptions and inconsistencies with Council's financial strategy, the consultation document cannot provide an effective basis for public consultation. And I guess that's not surprising to me, and I'm sure it's not surprising to many of us, because we have expected that that would be the brutal nature of the auditor's report that does say, that's given us an adverse opinion. I believe that part of our fundamental responsibility as councillors around this table is to actually deliver a responsible, prudent, sustainable and reasonable plan to our community, and that's where I think this plan actually does fail in that regard. Whilst I acknowledge that we could get through the next 3 years within the funding limitations that we've set and the LGFA have set, I think the decisions in those 3 years is what is actually potentially crippling us in the outer years. I often compare the council budget to our household budgets. It's obviously a little bit more complex and a lot bigger, but the fundamental aspects of putting the essential things in first and then doing the nice, adding the nice to have things in later if we can afford it, I think those fundamental principles should apply when we're dealing with the city's assets and the city's funds and ratepayer money. And I guess that's where I do struggle with the content and the wording that's associated in the consultation document, where we're really justifying what is a huge jump in spend to 1.4 billion of capital spend over the next 10 years, around a third of that being in improving or increasing our levels of service or new capital new. While we're jumping ahead in that, we're blaming what is an essential cost of nature calls, which is about a quarter of that, and saying we can't afford that. So I would extrapolate that out and say it's like us planning to go on holiday, planning to extend our deck and do renovations on our house, and then in 3 years saying we can't afford the rent or we can't afford groceries. And that's essentially what I see that we're doing with this plan. So it is a disappointment to me, and I'm not able to support it for those reasons.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start off just by, again, acknowledging all the work that everyone in this room and beyond has done to get us here. I actually think that it's quite a good plan. It has a lot in it, obviously, but it is a plan that starts to fill some of those gaps that have built up over years and years and years, and starts to address the fact that councils of the past were willing to kick the can, kick the can, and kick the can. So when I think about this budget, I see it as basically being necessary. We actually need to get on with this activity, both to address the shortfalls of the past, but also to take the city forward. So I'll certainly be speaking of it and thinking of it as a necessary budget to actually take this city in the direction we need to go. In terms of process, I've found it a bit challenging at times, and I certainly would welcome the opportunity as we continue to improve process at council to have input from, I think, all elected members into the steering of future processes around this, because it's one that we can always learn from as we continue. In terms of the auditor's adverse opinion, so I'm actually quite welcoming of this, because I think it actually finally puts it on the table in black and white. Like, the system's actually quite broken. If all we have is the rates horse to flog and flog and flog, that's a very dim future for local government, and we actually have to break out of that deadlock. And obviously there's some options coming to us. This isn't necessarily a segue into a comment on the Three Waters reforms or endorsement or not thereof, but clearly the model that we're working in has serious constraints, and I think it's actually helpful to our council's case to have in black and white from the auditor that some things aren't working. Really looking forward to the community input stage on this, so I'd be very interested to see what the community does have to say, and I hope that the community does hold this draft up in the full light of the housing crisis that we face, in the full light of the climate crisis that we face, and ask, is this the best we can do? Because I think fundamentally that is the question that we as a council need to be answering. Mr. Mayor.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, firstly acknowledge the comments that Councillor Naylor read out, which are very sobering from the auditor, but also comments that they have to say, especially when you look at our plan over the whole 10 years. But that isn't quite reality, and Councillor Johnston has outlined what the reality is, that this really is a plan for 3 years with some extra information in it. We know that this plan won't last 10 years. This plan's had some incredible effort go into it. We're drawing a line in the sand to say that we're not going to continue stretching ourselves thinner and thinner. We're not going to continue to defer work that needs to be done, and we are reviewing our budgets around barely covering the cost of running the city. This plan now looks past the current year. It shows our commitment to investing in our city and our infrastructure. Most importantly, we are finally looking at our bottom line and working out where the shortfall is. I'm very happy to support this 10-year plan. I'm very happy to support what is essentially a 3-year plan with a review to come. And very happy to stand up and explain that to our community. And I think the most important thing that's going to come out of our plan is actually going to be our comms plan that goes alongside that and telling our story. It is mentioned several times in the consultation document around the investment that we are making in our city, and that's something that needs to continue to be highlighted. But more than happy to support this today.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with most of the comments, so I won't go on. But where we're at is maybe a difficult place, but not at all surprising, and that's the balance of comments around the table. We went into this knowing where we would end up today. Thank you to the auditor for their frank comments, but no surprises there. It's time for an adult conversation with our community. That might be uncomfortable, but I think most of us around the table are confident in the work that we've done, in the evidence that we've sought, and the position that we've taken. And as the Deputy Mayor's just said, I'll be more than happy to have that conversation with our community. One comment I did want to make is around that rather unfortunate phrase, nice to have. When things turn up in our long-term plan, they are not magicked out of thin air by a bunch of fairies somewhere working in the background of council. These are programmes that have value for our community, and we have debated many of these at length because we all see value in different ways. Of course we do, that's why we're elected. But the fact that they've made it all the way through all of the hours and hours of officer and elected member work to be presented to our community at this stage demonstrates categorically that they are not simply a nice to have. If they were, they wouldn't be there. So I've spoken about this in workshops. I will continue to speak about it. At this stage, there is no such thing. What there is a discussion with our community about what they value, and they will come back to us on that. So if we've come to a consensus about the programmes that we're putting out for a community, let's just not call them nice to have. Thank you.
All right, councillors, I'll just, as Ryder reply, just thank you for your comments and look, I'll repeat, this is a 3-year LTP and we're being rather silly to try and paint it as a 10-year. Most of you understand that and have got that. I too, like Councillor Barrett, I actually welcome the audit opinion. And I understand we're not the only council. There's some bigger councils south of us that will have similar sort of opinions. And look, it highlights how stretched or broken the model is of local government's funding. If you look at all rates and tax within New Zealand paid by residents, over 85% goes to central government. Only approximately 15% comes to local government. Yet we're expected to provide over 50% of services to our residents. It doesn't add up. And you tip in a major project like this, a water plant like this, and it just is not going to work. So the system is somewhat damaged. I wouldn't say it's totally broken, but it's damaged, and it definitely needs a look at the financial revenue models for local government if we're to carry out all the services that we provide today. So I think some other comments there from Councillor Bowen about what our community expects and Councillor Johnson. People do want services, and our community will tell us. I'm absolutely sure of it. So please, councillors, we have gone through a lot of work to get to this stage. I'd hate to see some adverse comments tip this up. And please, if you could support the recommendations on the screen. Or vote now, please. And then it's passed, 15 votes for and 1 against. Thank you. Right. We have a big day today, councillors. There's 25 items on the agenda, and we're only up to number 7. So what I'll be looking to do, just to give you a little bit of a heads up, we'll probably break at 10:30 for a morning tea, a cuppa, and then I'll break just before 12:30. I have another online meeting I need to go to briefly, and then we'll be back in the chamber and we'll just work our way through the day after that. All right, number 7. Submission to the Local Government Commission, response to the Tokomaru Opiki boundary change proposal. We have a memo there from our governance manager, Hannah White. That's on page 29 of your papers. And Hannah, up to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. This has been a long process to get to this stage, and I'd like to acknowledge those members of the public who are here who put the original work into the proposal that went to the Local Government Commission, and to note that this current stage of the process has been open for submissions for a month. The final discussion document was placed on the Commission website and available to the public on the 5th of March, which you'll note is just right on our last council meeting. So this is the first time we've been able to meet together since then. And the submission timetable actually shuts tonight at midnight. So we've just sneaked in. Noting that there will be hearings for those that wish to be heard to their submissions, and that the Commission has indicated that those will be occurring on the 21st of April in Tokomaru. The submission before you addresses the key criteria which are set out in the Local Government Act. So there's a section, Schedule 3 in the Local Government Act, that puts the criteria. There's a list of 9 items that the Commission must consider when they look at one of these proposals. And so the submission addresses those key criteria. It's not about which territorial authority will give cheaper rates. It's about what's effective fulfilment of local government and the purpose of local government, which is about efficient service provision, and it's about fair representation. Noting that fair representation, one of those points is communities of interest, which I don't think many in this table would argue doesn't exist, but that communities of interest is only one of the factors involved. The focus of Palmerston City Council is the wellbeing of its current residents, and I think you've just around the table at the moment been looking at some significant stretch on ratepayers with the wastewater and other infrastructure costs that we're facing, and in a time of uncertainty in the sector, which has just been progressed around the table. So with that in mind, the submission puts forward that this is just added risk of unknown asset condition at this time, and also notes the Rangatane position on this, who are also making their own submission. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Hannah. And I would just like to make no, I'll leave it to comments. Sorry, I'll note for questions first. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. Are we happy with the availability of information and data that we've been able to get to make the assessment for the submission? I know on page 6 of the submission, which is page 60, it says an evaluation of the network from the data available. So do we feel like we've got a good assessment there?
It has taken time to get the data that we were really looking for. We have got what was available at the time, noting that at the time that we were putting this together, that Horowhenua District Council's long-term plan wasn't yet public. We were in a similar time period, and so their future projections weren't available at that point in time. But to the point that we were at, yes, we have received everything, noting that we'll never know the asset condition unless we're managing it ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question is about the original submission wording. On page 55, first paragraph, last 3 words. Don't you think it is giving an impression that although we are not favouring it, but we are still considering it, because it says at this time? Shouldn't we stop it at, Palmerston City Council doesn't support the requested blah blah at the city boundary, and shouldn't include these 3 words at this time? It gives me an impression that we are considering at any time in the future.
That's a valid question, Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor. The intention of the wording at this time was referring to this time of uncertainty in the sector, rather than, but I can see that could be misinterpreted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Hannah. Your point was that we should be putting the community first. That was one of your points. How do we do that when we don't know what the community view is?
So,
we haven't surveyed the community, when we don't know what the community wants.
This submission is from the Territorial Authority, so members of the public all have the power to put their own submissions in, and the Commission is expecting that that would happen. For the same reason the Commission has held public meetings as a part of that process. So this proposal has been, this proposed submission has been put together from the position of the authority. I can't make, although my comments went too far, I can't make an assumption about what the ratepayers of Palmerston North
Or the ratepayers of Tokomaru.
or the ratepayers of Tokomaru.
Just that you said we should be putting the community first, but we actually don't know what the community view is.
I'm not sure what my exact words were, Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor, but I think what I was intending, the message I was intending to get across was that the role of this territorial authority is the well-being of its current residents.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that's exhausted the questions. Thank you, Hannah. Councillors, we have three resolutions there. There's an extra one that has been added. If we could just go to those. So that's number 2, which it's in your papers, and number 3. I'll give you a moment to read that. I'm happy to move all 3, if the Deputy Mayor is okay to second all 3. Before I take any other comments, I'd just like to say, just want to take a moment to recognise, and I think it comes to where Councillor Harpiter was coming from, take a moment to recognise the original submitter and that Taupiki group that came to us, and the work, the mahi that the late Arthur Toms had put in coming to us, and you can recall when he visited us. Look, he was passionate about getting better outcomes for his community, and while the submission that's on the table, while the submission the council was making and is on the table for us to consider isn't what he or his group were after, I do want to acknowledge the commitment that those people have for their communities of Tokomaru and Opiki. Look, I just want to make a couple of comments around, there has been a bit of dialogue in social media and out there and on media that the city perhaps hasn't been open to exploring this. I'd absolutely refute that and say we have been open. The mere fact that we're discussing this now shows you that we have been open. But there has been a lot of due diligence, and some of you that have been around the table longer than I know that there's real challenges in taking over village assets. The financials with those, the risk, the subsidisation that needs to be, unless somebody from government comes and gives a big cheque to us, it is really, really hard to make this stack up. It isn't about cheaper rates, and I know that there is some that want cheaper rates. We know that. That's human nature. But actually there's cultural boundaries as well, and I just want to say they need to be respected. And they mutually don't overlap with territorial authorities. As we know, iwi have been here for many centuries before local government. We're only 150 years young, but they've been here for centuries. So that needs to be acknowledged and weighted. And I think that has been done in the submission that the officers have put in. But I just want to say the due diligence has been done. I had a very, very open mind and probably at early stages leaned that this might be a good thing. But would the people of Highbury, Hokowhitu, Ashurst, do they want to subsidise this? I probably would say they wouldn't. So it's a hard decision, but I think it probably is the best decision to make. So we have the 3 resolutions in there. What I do want to say is there are other opportunities for us, for these communities. We already have some shared services around libraries. So that's where number 3, the recommendation number 3 comes in. Can we explore other opportunities around recycling? They're 10 k's down the road, where is there services and trucks need to come 40 k's from Levin to get to them. Is there some community services we could provide? Is there some water services which the government will provide? So, look, I think there's opportunities there, and we get on very well with our southern neighbours, and I do think that we can look at perhaps some other services that we could do together. So I'll leave it at that. I'll ask if there are any other comments. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief comment. I'm very supportive of the submission that we've pulled together, and like you, I was probably swinging the other way initially and quite interested in exploring this. I guess the main deciding factor for me was when we heard from iwi that at this point in time they are not interested in exploring this. We've come quite a long way with our partnership with Rangitane, and at this stage I'm in favour of putting more protection around that than opening things up, which is what this does. In regards to the third recommendation, again, happy to support that. We already have got some arrangements with Manawatu District Council. We've got no further conversations with them around boundary changes. That doesn't need to come into it, but we can look at opportunities to work together, and we do this across the region. So looking at some sort of arrangement, or at least opening that conversation with Horowhenua District Council makes sense at this point in time, why this conversation's live.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also supportive of the submission. I think the boundary change that's been proposed is just one option on a spectrum of options, and 3 here picks up on one that will deliver some practical benefit for their community, and we could provide at a benefit for the collective. And we've gone through this in the 2000s with Manawatu District around the amalgamation, boundary change, and cross-boundary services. And this one here I see, again, just with the distance and practicality around the delivery service. And I think that is very favourable. So I'm happy supporting this position. I do believe we've had feedback, although informal, and I do believe we've had well-considered dialogue. And again, I guess that's been in informal settings. But now with the formality of adopting the submission, I'm in favour. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I also agree with it. I think where we are also seeing some shared services is through the health services, and I thought that Councillor Dennison might have brought that up. The health shuttle is also going down to Horowhenua and doing that already. I thought the DHB members might have brought that up. But we are doing that in the region already with the health services. So I think number 3 is a really good way of supporting and working with the Horowhenua district. So I think it's a good way forward to look at the services across the region. Okay, thank you, councillors. Look, I do, if we could go back to the, I'll read them out, mindful of people online. Number 1, if we go to number 1, please. So that the council resolves to approve the submission on the Local Government Commission's 1 March 2021 paper seeking your feedback, a request for Opiki and Tokomaru to become part of Palmerston North City, included as attachment 3 in the report titled Submission to Local Government Commission, Response to Tokomaru Opiki Boundary Change Proposal, presented to Council today, 7th of April 2021. Number 2, that the Chief Executive be delegated authority to make minor amendments to the submission on the Local Government Commission's 1 March 2021 paper, seeking your feedback on a request for Opiki Tokomaru to become part of Palmerston North City, included as attachment 3 to the report titled Submission to Local Government Commission, Response to Tokomaru Opiki Boundary Change Proposal, presented today. Number 3. That the Chief Executive be directed to work with Horowhenua District Council to explore opportunities to deliver services in a way that recognises the connection of Tokomaru and Opiki residents and what they have with Palmerston North. So look, I do feel for the residents, especially those that have brought this forward. This will be disappointing for them, and I do acknowledge that. But I do think we are acting in the best interest of our current residents, our current ratepayers. But I do hope number 3 gives them some some hope that we will look at what we can do for them, as other councillors have outlined. So if I could ask you to support these 3 recommendations, please, and vote. And that has passed 15 votes for with 1 abstention. Thank you, councillors. Okay, that's a timely break. We have another big report coming. So look, we'll have a cup of tea. Thank you, everybody. We will break now till 11:15. Thank you. Blessings 5:15 because, well, it's because it gets light now at 6. I got collared by Trieste. Kia ora, everybody. Welcome back. We'll now move on with our meeting agenda. Number 8 on our order paper is Māori wards option, and there's a report there on page 63 of your papers, and I'll ask the Governance Manager, Hannah White, to speak to that, please.
Morena koutou. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The paper before you, before I start, I did notice this morning there's a typo, and I apologise for that, on the top of page 64, where the problem or opportunity is stated. Palmerston City Council has snuck in there in the sentence, so if you remove that, it'll make a lot more sense. So the Local Electoral Māori Wards and Māori Constituencies Amendment Act came into effect on the 2nd of March of this year, and it gives councils across the country a short period until the 21st of May to decide whether to establish Māori wards for the 2022 election. Māori wards are one mechanism that allows for Māori representation in council decision making. Māori wards are seats for which those who are registered on the Māori electoral roll can vote. Noting that the seat or the seats would be for Māori roll registered voters, but not necessarily rangitane, and that one does not need to be rangitane or indeed Māori to stand for election in a Māori ward. The process is to first decide today whether to establish Māori wards. Then the council develops an initial proposal for submissions and hearings, followed by a final proposal, which is confirmed subject to appeal. And that process is set out for you in the paper in 4.7. The proposal at that point would set out a proposed option of the number of councillors, how many Māori and general seats. It would consider ward and at-large options, the number of councillors in total, the names of the wards, whether to have community boards. It would not include the question of Māori seats or the voting system, as these are decided by council resolution under the Local Electoral Act. Having Māori voice at the council table is in line with the 2018 10-year plan, the Connected Community Strategies Active Citizenship Plan, which sought to have Māori voice at the council table. It is in line with the agreed strategic principles of inclusive leadership. It is in line with Rangitane aspirations, and so the report thus sets out options of timing as to when to establish Māori wards, now or later. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll open it up for any questions. There is none. Okay, sorry, there is. I've sparked some activity. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Hannah. Just looking at page 74 and the different options that are there, you mentioned that Māori seats could be voted on for voters on the Māori roll. Am I correct? The mixed ward system, can you just explain who can vote for the general citywide ward and the Māori citywide ward seats?
This might be a little bit easier for Palmerston North to understand this model because we're used to an at-large system. So in councils where they have a general ward system now, they still have at-large for the mayor. So that is everybody, regardless of which electoral roll you're on, can vote for your mayor. So similarly, in a mixed system, what you can do is everybody can vote for the mayor, everybody can vote for the number of seats that you allocate as the at-large, and then you can then separate for general ward, Māori ward. And then in the general ward and Māori ward, you only vote for the people within the role that you're sitting on.
Okay, so just further to that, so looking at that bottom box under that mixed ward system, could a resident stand for all four of those options?
At the same time? Yeah. I would actually have to check that. Sorry, I can't give you that answer right now. But an individual would be eligible to stand in any of those, yes.
Any or all,
yes.
Essentially. Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that's all for now.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I'm not sure if the examples of the full ward system on page 74, where you've got a mix, which will come, I know, at a later report, but when we go to 10 to 13 councillors, it only produces an outcome of 1 seat for Māori. What is the current threshold? If you haven't got an example for 14 councillors, can I just understand, would that be 1 or would that create 2 seats? I just want to understand where the threshold is.
As soon as you drop from 15 total councillors, the ratio, the calculation that's set out in the Act then means that you would only have 1 seat.
So 14 would be an outcome of 1 seat. Okay, yes. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, no more questions. Right, thank you, Hannah. Right, we have the resolutions there, and Deputy Mayor, you want to move something?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move Recommendation 1, Option 2, and Recommendation 2 and Recommendation 3. Councillor Johnson has said she will second that.
Right. Okay. So could we perhaps just, we'll just get things off the screen and get those correct options up, and then you can speak to those. So it was the Deputy Mayor moving and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Great. All right, over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. One of my proudest accomplishments during my time on council has been being one of the 10 elected members who last term voted for the establishment of Māori wards. Subsequent to that, I was very proud to lead the campaign Together Kia Kotahi Mai, where we campaigned against an out-of-town renter crowd who sought to prevent a decision of this council being realised. On the 23rd of February 2021, I was very proud of our local government minister, the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, who led the mahi behind the local electorate Māori Wards and Māori Constituencies Amendment Bill, which passed its third reading, resulting in us having this conversation here today. And I'm hoping that today I'll be proud of our colleagues and this council who will vote on the establishment of Māori Wards for our city. It's a great privilege to make a decision that honours our commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, one that reflects our partnership with tangata whenua and respects the wishes of mana whenua rangitane locally. Voting for Māori wards is a small but significant step towards our country understanding what it means to partner with Māori. It won't be until that partnership is realised that we can truly hold our heads up and say that we're giving effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I will proudly be voting yes again today for Māori wards, and I'd like you to join me and collectively affirm the voice of Māori as equal partners to this council.
All right, I'll open it up for any other comments. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm supporting this, and I hope that you will too, because I think it's about leadership. It's about us providing leadership to the community about what a treaty partnership with Rangitane really looks like. And we've made some steps along the way, but this, I say to you, is a significant step that Rangitane are expecting us to take. Warm words are all very well, as Wiremu would say, but actually, Māori have been waiting for this for a long time, and it's about time that they had voting rights around this table. So just to remind you that as a council we did vote for Māori wards, and it was overturned on the petition and poll by people who were paid to collect signatures in Palmerston North, paid to create a polarised and offensive debate in the community, and I found that whole process very undermining of our local democracy and our Māori community. So I'm very pleased that we now have the opportunity through government to right that wrong effectively. So I'll just remind you that this Māori ward option is supported by Rangitane, and also that in Palmerston North, our latest demographic detail tells us that we've got 18% Māori residents, but we don't have any Māori people sitting around the table here. So there's no doubt that Māori are underrepresented in the current system, which doesn't favour a minority. And I think it's our role as elected members to recognise that if we're giving effect to a proper treaty partnership, we need to be providing opportunity for Māori voice at the table. So in terms of opportunities that this gives us, I think we need to look at this on sort of the positive scale. It gives us an opportunity for Māori perspectives around the table that we don't have at the moment. And it may also give an opportunity for some of our community who want some general wards to be able to have that happen. I don't know how many of you remember, but going back several years in representation reviews, there was community desire for wards, and council even voted for wards, but it was overturned. So there's an opportunity here not only for Māori to be adequately represented, but for the general population to be able to say that they want some degree of ward system as well. I think some people may be concerned that the poll that was carried out in 2018 voted against Māori wards. And on that, I would say that society has changed a lot since 2018. We have moved on a lot as a country and as a community. And just a couple of examples of that. It's since that time that we've signed the Kawanata with Rangitane. Major media organisations like Stuff have reviewed how they cover Māori issues and have acknowledged that they haven't been doing it well. And I think that to think that the population is still where they were in 2018 today is not correct. I also ask you just to consider who is supporting this and who is against it. So this is fully supported by Local Government New Zealand, who've been advocating for Māori ward options to have a level playing field for several years, and supported by the government, and it's supported by Rangataone. And I think we know who doesn't support it. So I would just ask you, councillors, to be on the right side of history in this, and not expect Rangataone and Māori in general to wait any more time to have a seat and a vote around this table. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am quite happy to support this. Firstly, when we look at community views, I absolutely didn't trust the poll at all. I had personal experience when I was living in the Manawatu around their discussion on Māori wards, where I had approached a JP, and that JP had tried to get me to sign a document that actually had, Māori wards as the title, name, address, phone number, and basically told me that in that document, by signing it, I was just getting information about Māori wards. So I know for a fact that a lot of people who signed those polls didn't actually realise what it was that they were signing. And a lot of them were in quite vulnerable positions where they were going to trusted members of the community to try and get actual, life-changing things happening, and that was what they were presented with. And so I am quite incensed about the poll system. I found that entire thing, the entire process around the poll, and the racist comments that it encouraged, really quite offensive. So that's my issue about the poll. I'm not sure what percentage of our community has had Te Tiriti training, actually, or know and understand the importance of having Māori representation on every decision-making table. As a welcoming city with more than 150 different ethnic communities, we need to make sure that our Indigenous voices, opinions, and experiences are not lost. We have mana whenua, Rangataone, representing the views of Rangataone, but we also need Māori wards to represent the views of the many Māori who live in Palmerston North but are not Rangataone. Both views are vital at this table. I am not tangata whenua, but I am tangata moana. And as a Pacifica person, the only woman of colour on this table, I have experienced many barriers to get here. And even since I've been at this table, I still continue to experience many barriers. It is not a level playing field. The decisions made at this table impact the lives of Māori and Pacifica people, who we all know are often at the bottom of all of the negative statistics, who are often the most vulnerable. The only way we can change that is if we have people at this table who understand what life is like in these communities, who understand the values, the culture, the tikanga, the way of engaging. When looking at voter turnout, people will not engage if they don't think it will make a difference. And we as a council have made a lot of progress, and we should be proud of that. You can see the progress by the diversity that is already here. But we have so much more to learn, and Māori have so much more to contribute. And we need to make it easier for them to be able to participate because they deserve to be here. And under the local electoral Maori Wards and Maori Constituencies Amendment Act 2021, we now have the power to decide Maori Wards. Council has already decided that we wanted Maori Wards. We know this. If it wasn't for that dodgy, racist poll, it would already be happening, which is why the law was changed in the first place. So I don't want to wait any longer. Maori have waited long enough.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Last time I voted for Maori Wards, and after I'd voted, I was quite surprised after talking with a lot of Maori that they didn't want it. And the rationale of why they didn't want it was because it dilutes their power around this table, because you have to be on a Maori roll to be able to vote for any of us around this table. Not on the Maori roll. If we go for a Maori ward, it means that the people who are on the Maori ward lose their power to vote for any other councillor, any other candidate standing for council. They can only vote for those Maori that are standing in the ward. If there's only two councillors per ward, two candidates for a Maori ward, and there are 6 people standing, that means only 2 of them can get on, but the other 4 may be good candidates. Now, STV, we used to have wards in Palmerston North, and STV with citywide is one of the most fairest ways of voting, and it's because you've got that STV, that first preference vote, which means, you can see around us why we've got the diversity around council, around this table, because of STV. It means that minority percentages of minority, it's citywide, so that means you can target all your voters citywide. If you're in a ward, you can't. You can only vote if you happen to be within that ward. So, for me, that's one of the biggest things that dilutes the power. The other thing that I think, and I've just lost track of what I was going to say. So you've got, the other thing is you've got, the other thing was around Maori representation around the table. The reason we have no Maori representation around the table is not one Maori stood at the last election. So I think if we got out and encouraged anybody...
Mr Mayor, sorry, point of clarification. That's not correct. Maori did stand in the last election.
Excuse me, I don't want to be interrupted. You can interrupt when you comment.
Okay, so can you continue, please?
All right. So there may have been 1 or 2 have stood, but I don't know last time if there was anybody. But anyway, there's not been a lot of Maori have stood. We've had a case where Wiremu stood for Horizons and he's been voted in. So I don't think there's any discrimination against Maori. But there's, as far as that goes, now I've lost track of what I was going to say. So I think we should be encouraging Maori to stand with STV, which means everyone in Palmerston North means that they can vote, and we get the best selection of people, and we get the best people around this table. And I just don't like Maori Wards for the fact that it's diluted and it's tokenism, and I think that we could have a better diversity around the table.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've played on both sides of the view over this in the past, but I think it is one around timing. We have the opportunity to advance something now or pause to the next local elections, and I believe it'll be inevitable, because I believe the point that's been made previously that the country has moved on quite quickly, progressed in the last couple of years to an openness to have equity recognised in a better way. And I think one of the most significant things that we can reflect on is the local government minister has made way for this happening without the barrier of the poll. There's been local authorities that have wanted to advance in this direction with decisions around political tables that have been held up through the mechanism of a poll, and influence with outside membership or citizens has been referenced as well. And I think that's a disrespect to the decision-making processes here locally. When we're reviewing representation review, it would be fair to say we've been underrepresented around this table with Māori membership. We have addressed that this term by having appointed members of iwi, which I think's worked well. And so this has taken it to another step again. I believe I'm very comfortable around advancing it now. I think it would also centre around some of the other important decisions that the community should have input on around the number of members around this table. And again, I like at-large elections, but I think people can put their views forward for wards equally. So I'm going to support the recommendations. I'm very comfortable with the line of sight, and recognising that there was a view that came through the poll in 2018, but that was not of a city-wide response. That was only still a proportion of our residents that fed into that, with the outside influence with shaping some of that decision-making. And I think now, if you did a similar poll, I think there'd be a much better match for support to make way for these type of possibilities. So, and this is notwithstanding your point, I think Councillor Beattie makes quite well, is that in ward-based systems you have this mismatch of, okay, you only get to vote for one or two candidates rather than voting for 10 to 14. I respect that as far as power of number of candidates who you're voting for and probably the selection number. However, I think this addresses equity, and I think it shows that we are progressive and takes advantage of a full confidence of moving forward with the representation. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm really happy to support the recommendations in front of us. I wasn't going to comment today, but just wanted to comment on a few of the things that were raised, particularly by Councillor Beattie. I think there's no doubt that the options in front of us are not perfect, and there's no doubt that we've had mixed feedback about those options. But what I think there's also no doubt about is that the current system has not delivered a seat or seats at the table for Māori to be appropriately represented here. So from my perspective, I think the decisions that we had to make in 2008 were very complicated by the fact that there was a poll that was inevitable, that was divisive and costly, and that certainly made decisions quite difficult. But I think the new legislation does give us a new opportunity to move forward with what I believe is the right decision. The options for Māori on the Māori roll are not necessarily limited to them only being able to vote for the people within the Māori seats. As we've seen in the paper, there is an option for a mixed system where they actually would be able to vote for the at-large seats. Yes, that is quite a complex system, and I look forward to the discussion and the debate that we'll have when the paper comes back as to whether it's worth considering that system, but it certainly does address the issue which was a concern and has been a concern by some people about the fact that people on the Māori roll would not be able to vote for any of us effectively. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to see this progress and trust that it will be supported today. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I voted for this last time. I'll be voting for it again this time. I want to recognise the good work that we've done around this table in giving Rangatane a voice. But that choice of word is deliberate. That's something we've given to them. And I don't feel that's particularly appropriate. I feel like they're entitled to a voice, and that's what Māori Wards does. It gives tangata whenua an entitlement to a voice. And I hope we continue to extend that option of a seat around the table, specifically to our mana whenua, to Rangatane. But there are two categories of people that we're talking about here, Māori and iwi, and different responses are appropriate to each. I support single transferable vote, always have done, always will. It's the best option, and it does deliver diversity. But if you look around the table, you could draw the conclusion that not all diversity is created equal. And some people, some peoples experience greater barriers than others. And my understanding of Te Tiriti is that we have a responsibility to take those barriers away, and this is how we do it. So I'll be supporting it.
Councillor Hapata.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I came in and out of the queue, so thanks for letting me come back in. I just wanted to say that I have gone round in circles on this one. I am not going to support it. I have debated it with my husband at home as well. Several times we've gone around on circles on it. But we have got iwi around our tables on several of our committees, and it's been great having them here discussing a lot of our issues in a lot of our committees on environment, on economics, on community and our own Rangatane committee. So it is great having them around our table. So, and I do really value the input that Rangatane give us on these committees. So, and in my own conversations I've had with Rangatane, I have said to them on several occasions, have you tried to put people forward to council in the elections? So I've had those one-on-one discussions with many of them, and yeah, it's not without lack of trying of having those discussions and trying to find candidates. So I'm not going to put this forward. I'm not going to support this for reasons that I am. One is mine is around STV. I don't support a ward system, but I do support an STV system, and I do think it is around getting that best person forward, and that's how I do think it should be. I do think we've got a good, diverse group of people around our table, and that is why I'm going forward with that, with this going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As it is a reasonably historic moment, I did feel it was appropriate to comment, even though it would probably be obvious to most of you that since I voted for this last time, that I'll be still very much voting in support. For the reason that Te Tiriti gives Māori right to be here, and we are decades and decades and decades actually overdue as a council in acknowledging that right. I did want to, I suppose, push back a little bit on the notion that there isn't discrimination and barriers, and I guess what I would use to push back on that is the fact that numbers don't lie. And if you look at historically, the Māori representation at this table relative to the Māori population has always been underrepresented, I would say, from your dot if we actually had records back that far. And it's just an immense privilege to be here at this point in time, acknowledging the progress the society has made in moving on to be able to support, finally, the realization or the beginnings of realization of the rights that are in Te Tiriti for Māori access to this table. It's been interesting to actually hear some of the discussion drift around wards and not wards, STV and not STV. That is not the debate. The debate is Te Tiriti and Māori rights and realizing those at this table, and now is the time.
All right, right of reply back to you, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to address a few points. Councillor Bowen just touched on in her response or her comments around something that was mentioned around STV and how well it works and the diversity that it brings. If STV worked for Māori, they would be around this table. STV has been in for several elections. It's not a new system that we're testing out now. It's not working. People who stand for Māori wards get elected on merit, just like any other councillor. Some of the comments are inferring that the lack of representation is the fault of Māori, that their merit isn't equal to our merit. But if somebody with an equally good or better opinion than what we've got is outside, we're never going to hear their opinion if we don't open the door and invite them in. Māori get to determine what role they're on. They make that decision. Don't take that choice away from them. In 1840, Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed with the understanding of several things. Some of those: co-governance, equal decision-making, partnership. Where is the partnership? Where is the co-governance? We are all here, all of us, because of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. There is no tangata whenua around this table. We are on their whenua, making decisions without them having an equal voice or vote. Māori representation in this city is an issue, and in front of us today we have a solution. As it's been said, let's be on the right side of history. Let's vote for Māori wards.
All right, thank you, councillors. We will now vote. And that has passed 11 votes for and 5 against. All right, councillors, thank you. We move on now to number 9 on the order paper, which is notice motion around the city's COVID relief fund, and I'll pass to Councillor Bowen on this. It's on page 77 of your papers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you particularly for allowing this to come forward on what we knew would be a really busy order paper today. So, colleagues, I have sent round some background information, and I tried to put as much as possible into the paper so we'd have time to think about that before discussing it today. So I just want to make a very few comments in putting this before you. I think we all know that COVID hasn't gone away. When we invented our COVID relief fund about a year ago, none of us knew what COVID would look like. We didn't know what impact it would have on our community. We were really putting something in place in the hope that it would be the right thing, in the hope that it would be enough, showing a willingness to our community to support our community groups in delivering what we felt were going to be really essential services for our community, and that turned out to be true, but not in the way that we thought it was going to be. Recently, I hear a great deal of uncertainty about the ongoing viability, particularly of our community-led events sector, which concerns me and I think should concern us, because events are a core element of our creative and exciting city strategy, and also our connected and safe city strategy. And this concern was reinforced for me at our recent discussion with the Chair and CE of Te Papa, who told us that from their perspective, the events sector is being particularly impacted by COVID-19, and that impact continues and is exacerbated by changing alert levels. And we know that that continues to be an issue for us. And possibly even with the government's announcements yesterday about a travel bubble, we could expect to see more rapid changes of alert level as we seek to respond to the wider world around us as we open up more. So I don't think that COVID-19 is over. The problem we have is that the organisation with our local event sector is an immature model, and it relies heavily on individuals acting as events managers, often without an umbrella community group or trust, sometimes in various ad hoc, complicated arrangements of their own business and tax returns. Our own bucket of community funding has different arrangements for different funds as to what we'll accept. Our community has worked hard to deal with COVID. All of our events have COVID plans that they swing into action when alert levels happen, but that's often at short notice, often increases costs, and those costs or lack of income flows on through our community, through our associated sectors, our business sector, hospitality, and performing arts particularly. So there is significant uncertainty around booked events. People have made do over the last 12 months, but that is not sustainable long term. And at the moment, we don't know how much longer our event sector will have to deal with that. We know from a recent query through Councillor Help that our fund hasn't been used very much. It's not quite meeting the need that we thought it would when we set it up. I was disappointed about that, but the feedback we had was that officers see this as a political decision to establish the fund in the first place, and if we want to change it, then that's a political decision too. And so I'm bringing it to you today. I'm asking you to reflect the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and extend the fund for another year. There is no intention to make this a permanent part of our arrangement. It's a reflection of the COVID situation. I'm asking you to lift the cap from $5,000 to $10,000, which you'll recall was quite a lively discussion at the time, and maybe we didn't quite land that right. I'm asking you to extend the eligibility criteria of the fund to recognise the role that individuals play in delivering community events, not changing the scope of the fund at all, but extending the eligibility criteria to recognise that our model is a little bit complicated. And in response to the officers' report, Councillor Johnson and I have added a fourth recommendation which seeks to remove commercial entities from the definition of ineligible applicants, so that individuals operating under a business structure, which is usually a sole trader, but we don't want to get into that discussion here, are eligible if other conditions are met. This package that I've put together to bring to you today provides a low-risk method of encouraging events to go ahead in the face of ongoing uncertainty. It provides a way to respond to actual need and rapidly changing circumstances. It won't make people make a profit, but it might mitigate a loss and keep events viable while we get through this period of time. But within that first recommendation, I've also asked that the Chief Executive provide a report on uptake and issues back to community development in September. So that's kind of belt and braces approach that allows any unforeseen consequences of this package to come back to committee in short order and mitigates any further risk. And so with that, I'm happy through you, Mr. Mayor, to take any questions that members have.
Okay, thank you, Councillor, and it's seconded by Councillor Johnson. Before we get into any questions, there is an officer's report, which is on the back of it. We'll take that as being read. Thank you, Julie, for providing that and acknowledge that. I'll open it up for any, it's really questions and comments, I would say, with this one. Councillor Johnson.
It's a comment, if that's okay. Yep, so I seconded this after doing some consultation with Community Services Council about the take-up and potential for a need of this fund next year for community organisations. And so a couple of points I want to make. The first one is that no extra money is involved here. This is a rollover of the fund that we put in place that so far hasn't been used. Community Services Council suggested to me that they think that the pain is just starting for some community groups and that the financial realities might only become apparent as we come to the end of the financial year or in June, that organisations that have had the wages subsidy or MSD or other COVID-targeted funding will now not have it, and that the coming year could be looking tougher for community organisations. So I think it's very important that we do roll this over. In terms of the widening the criteria and raising the cap, there was concern when we initially debated this that there might be a big kind of rush for this fund and that we might need to make sure that it was distributed widely. But we know now that that hasn't been the case, and therefore I think that raising the cap is a reasonable response at this point, knowing what we know now. In terms of the events support that this might be able to give, a good example for me was the community day that the Kelvin Grove Community Association traditionally organised at Linklater Park. And some of you might know that they cancelled this quite a long way out, not because we were in a level 2 or whatever at that point, but because the uncertainty of being in and out of levels meant that they didn't have confidence to go ahead with that event. And so I think, particularly if we find we're bouncing in and out of levels, that the financial commitment of putting an event on a month or 2 months ahead when you're not sure what the level will be will discourage community organisations that have got limited funds, like the community centres, from wanting to risk expenditure. And so I think that widening it so that we could cover those kinds of community events would be very sensible. So I'd urge you to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've actually got a few questions, if that's okay, that relate to the officer's report. So at the last paragraph at the bottom of page 82 talks about that the balance of the fund may be allocated in ways usually addressed by income relief efforts of the government, such as the wage subsidy or social welfare benefits. And it also talks about the potential for criticism from other sectors who would not have the access to this sort of funding. Two questions really. What are the other sectors that we would potentially get criticism for who wouldn't have access to the funding? And just also to understand whether there are gaps in terms of the comment made by the other income relief efforts of the government, if there are gaps there that would be addressed by the notice of motion.
Kia ora koutou, councillors, through you, Mr Mayor. I can't answer that second question, really, because this is not a research paper on the processes that have been put in place by the government to address these or any other funding shortfalls. The comment is really just to alert councillors to the potential for unintended consequences of this proposal. I mean, as Councillor Bowen has pointed out, you're absolutely able to do this. The report just points out that perhaps this fund is best seen as very different from the normal community funding processes. I think we would be bringing a lot more advice to you should there be a proposal of this nature that was coming to our community funding, normal community funding pools. So this is just pointing out that this is a very unusual circumstance and that there may be things that views of the community or any other people who won't have access to this funding that may come forward. We don't know what those are because that research hasn't been done.
Okay, and just two other brief questions, if that's okay. The first recommendation in the notice of motion asks for some consultation with the community sector and a report, and I'm just wondering, in terms of staff availability and time for that consultation and report by September, is that reasonable, or is that able to be accommodated within the current workload?
That's actually a question for community services, community development manager, who's not able to be here today. My understanding is that given that there's been such a low uptake of the fund, it wouldn't be a great deal of work to provide informal feedback.
Okay.
Just to reiterate what Julie said, I think that's achievable.
Okay, and just finally, the effect on the LTP for changing something to have a new budget in the year one of the LTP, would that just be changed in June, or how would that work?
We would need to formally make that change sometime after consultation closes before the final's made, so there will be some form of formal resolution required to make that happen.
Okay. I'm happy to comment now if you want, or do you want to do, I don't know if there's other questions.
Go with comment and then I'll jump to the other councillors.
Thanks. Now, I'm really happy to support the second recommendation here to increase the limit per application to 10,000, because I think when we made this decision, we did probably anticipate a lot more applications would be coming in, and that hasn't obviously eventuated. So I think those who have identified the need and made the applications should be able to access more than 5,000 per application. I'd support that. In terms of rolling the fund over to year one of the next LTP. I don't support that, so I won't be supporting 1 or 3. My reasons are that I do believe, given the officer's report, that there perhaps are other ways that those needs are being met through the government sources, but also that I'm a little bit wary of when there are one-off funds that are established. Often what I've seen over recent years is for those funds then to become business as usual and continue, the expectation is for them to continue on. And whilst I supported the concept of having this fund for a year, I wouldn't like to see it continue on as a ongoing fund, given the current restraints. Thanks.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I just want to reiterate some of the comments that have been made a wee bit, and indicate that I will support all of these changes here. I do know that our event sector has been, well, our art sector really has been affected by COVID, a lot more than we expected it to be. They have experienced extra costs, and a lot of those extra costs actually come with rescheduling events, re-advertising events, often at short notice. So you have people who have been planning these events for months and months and months to happen at a certain time, and then we go into level 2, and suddenly it's all up in the air, and it creates a whole bunch of anxiety for everyone involved in those events. So voting yes to this will be supporting our events, our performers, our venues, our caterers, our sound techs, our light people. You know, there's a lot of players involved here, and this fund will help to support that. When we initially discussed this, I was the one who moved the motion to limit that fund to $5,000. And at the time, we thought that was a good idea because we didn't, at that point, know the full extent of COVID. And now that we have, you know, we're a year on, I do think that a $10,000 limit is more appropriate. And so I'm quite happy to support that. COVID has not gone away, and this is a COVID relief fund for our local community. It's not an ongoing maintenance, what do you call it? It's not an ongoing fund that will be in there forever, I don't imagine. It is a COVID relief fund to respond to our needs while we are in COVID. And as Councillor Bowen mentioned earlier, now that we're about to open the borders, we're going to probably feel the impacts of what's happening outside of New Zealand a lot more. So we need to have the ability to respond appropriately, and I think this does that, so I'm quite happy to support it.
Just before I go to the next councillor, the CE would just like to make a comment. Oh, sorry, the CFO would just like to make a comment on one of the councillor's comments.
My comment is just to give some clarity, not necessarily to have a debate, but if we carry the unspent money from the current year forward into next year, we're not proposing to increase rates, so it will have no rates impact because we've already rated for the entire sum in the current year. Just wanted to completely clarify that so that clears up expectations.
Thank you. And Councillor Bowen, this is for all. I mean, a few of you are heavily involved in arts, but this is for all sectors, isn't it?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. This is about events that serve the benefit for the good of our community. Councillor Johnson referenced the Linklater Open Day event. Examples that I might talk to might be the impact that we saw recently on the Striders Tuesday night series, on I Tried the Tribe. Both of those big events had to cancel 1 or 2 sessions. I've talked to both of those organisations. They managed that within their existing reserves, but that's not sustainable long term. And we saw our own Sister Act, which is an arts example, but you're bouncing in and out of levels, putting fences up in the middle of the region, and we were able to support them through this fund to be able to do this. We were one of the first theatres, in fact I think we were the first major theatre to get a show back on stage because we had this fund. But Act 3 Productions, who put on Sister Act, had $4 left in their bank account before council funded them through this fund. They were that close to pulling the plug. So this fund is really important to all of our events operators, however they're structured to do it. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just want to say, from an economic development point of view, I think this is really I support it and support all four recommendations. I think this is really sensible. I think both what you've put forward for all events is really good. And I think what we heard from Te Papa, from the CE and from the Chair, I think the disruption that we've seen for events across the city, as soon as Auckland goes into a lockdown, and that could be imminent, we just don't know what's going to happen from what comes out of the bubble. Anything, whenever they go into a lockdown, it affects us in Palmerston North. We see it in anything that can happen. So I think this is really sensible. It's a limited amount of money, so it's not as if it's a lot of money, it's only a limited amount. So I think it's really, really good. So well done for putting the initiative forward.
Councillor Dennison.
I'm in favour. I'm not going to speak to it, as lots of others have, but for completeness, I just want to move the recommendations in the officer's memorandum that the information be received, just for completeness. Thank you.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hancock, thank you. Right, we'll come back to that while the officers get that. I'll just go back, write a reply to you if you need it, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to be brief, this is different from all of our other funds. It's different because COVID is different. We're in unprecedented territory. That was the most overused word of last year, but it continues to be a thing. COVID hasn't gone away. We still need to respond to the needs of our community. This isn't business as usual. But it is business that we have already rated for, we have already consulted on, and we have already taken that money. We didn't think that we would have money left at the end of the year to put towards anything else. I don't think we should be putting it towards something else. The need is still there in our community. And this is a real opportunity, and we've heard this already in different contexts today, to provide leadership. You know, in talking to some of the national organisations who are based here in Palmerston North, in bringing this forward, this will be showing real leadership in the events space in New Zealand. We are going further and being more creative than lots of other councils, even our large metro colleagues, have been able to go. And that is credit to the good work that was done in the first place of putting this fund in place and the way it was framed up then. So, colleagues, I would really appreciate your support for this. Thank you.
All right, councillors, we'll vote on the four the recommendations that are there, and then we'll come back to the report. Nobody's asked for it. So we'll vote on them, thank you. That has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. We'll now come to Councillor Dennison's accepting the officer's memorandum, and seconded by Councillor Hancock. I don't think we need to speak to this, so we'll vote on this. Thank you. This passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we move to number 10 on our order paper, moving through the day. Summerhays Street future use consultation. We have a memo there from our Parks Manager, Kathy Diva-Todd, and Bryce Hosking, our Property Manager. I'll invite them up to speak to this in summary. We'll take it as being read, obviously. Page 87 of your papers.
Yeah, nothing to add. Happy to take it as read and take any questions. Thank you.
Kathy, you were taken as read as well?
I will, and I'm also prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you. All right. And you've got some. Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Kathy and Bryce. So my question's around use of this land for social housing. So in 1.7, it says this if it was repurposed for housing, this keeps council's options open regarding the final housing outcome, and that could include social housing, could it?
Definitely, it can be everything from creating sections or housing and selling them right through to retaining them for social housing.
Okay. And in the consultation document for the long-term plan, we've got programme 1459, additional social housing, 7 million for years 3 to 5. Do we have a site for that additional social housing identified yet?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce and Kathy. Just a question around timelines. So the next steps is for a report to come through to planning next month. Obviously, if this isn't supported through consultation, then we'll possibly hit pause. If it is supported and we need to rezone the land, what are we looking at in terms of timeframes for that process to be completed?
I'll pass over to David, who might be better to answer that question.
So once you're through a general consultation process with a statement of proposal, which would be seeking to repurpose the land, you'd be into a rezoning proposal, which would be 9 months at best, 18 months at worst.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple questions. The first one's just around the deficit that's been identified in that part of the city around recreational sort of access, proximity to recreational areas, and obviously this is one piece of land, and there's also the Albert Street depot. So sort of within those two potential processes that we might be going through, is there going to be some consideration of where we might be able to provide at least some scale of reserve or park that could be accessible?
So just to be clear, councillors, there's not a deficit in the volume of reserves in the city. We actually well exceed the national standards for that. What's identified here is that there are 110 houses in the area that are greater than 500 metres from a local reserve. You would be aware that Memorial Park as a city reserve is very close to the site, so you could also say that the residents in this area are closer to a city reserve than some other residents in the city may be. So I think you really need to take it in the context of as a whole network. In terms of any application for a rezoning, any subdivision, if it was council that developed or if it was a private developer, we would consider at that time the recreational needs and the contribution that the subdivision makes to that, and whether that be monetary or whether that be land.
Thank you. The other question that I had was around this specific consultation that would kick off should we pass these recommendations today, and whether that consultation will be teasing out community views on whether we would see a development towards a public housing or a private housing developments in that space.
No, so it would identify it as repurposing it for housing. The specific end outcome of what that would look like would be a separate exercise.
So there would be a subsequent round of community engagement or consultation around what specific uses we might put it to?
Well, once it was rezoned to residential, I suppose we don't have necessarily a requirement in that space, but council would definitely have to make future decisions around exactly what that would be. And as Councillor Johnson's question, everything that could be anything from social housing or public housing right through to developing it and selling sections. So council definitely would have the opportunity to make a separate decision over and above that.
I think just to add to that, so associated with any housing decision is obviously associated with that a funding decision as well. And so whilst we've got social housing at one end, we've got sale of properties, we've got a whole lot of things in between, like leasehold sections, you know, there's a variety of options. So we would really need to go through the process of saying, if it was housing, what are all the high-level options, what are the benefits, what are the costs, what are the risks associated with that, and bring back a paper around that that's really about an investment decision, which is quite separate to the decision with the community about should we move it over from housing from its current use, which is the consultation we're talking about at the moment.
Great, thank you both.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Maybe this is a question for David. How many houses do you think that we could actually get onto that site?
I think that relates to the line of questioning that you've put to Bryce and Kathy. It would depend on the type of housing that you wanted to do. Whether it was if it was social housing, they're typically going to be smaller. If it was market, selling sections, you might get a few less. So that would depend on the type of housing that you decided to, or the council decided to pursue.
So ballpark though?
I think there's been a few scenarios done if we just did a typical sort of traditional subdivision on there. Bryce may recall what the numbers were. I don't.
Yeah, if we were just to do I guess a very traditional type development, we might be looking at 20 medium density sections, but as David said, I mean, that really comes down to the final option, and that could go up or down accordingly. And it's only been a high level concept, nothing more than that at this stage.
Thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you both for the report. 3.6 on page 90 is talking about importation of soil if we need an alternative for the space. Is it just a generalized comment, or have we already done some analysis on the soil?
No, in New Zealand there's a number of councils that have converted bowling greens over to other recreational uses. There's pesticides that were used historically for killing worms that do remain in the soil, and so those tests of those sites from other councils have found that the soil has not been suitable for growing edible crops in. However, there isn't a health risk to the use of that land. But in a case like this, because it's that type of thing, that we would do a hazard investigation as part of our due diligence on the site.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, that is the questions done. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Bryce. Right, we'll now move to the resolutions that are there, and we have that Council resolves to confirm the repurposing the land located at 17 Summerhay Street, Palmerston North, for housing as the preferred option for the future use of this land, subject to the required consultation process. Number 2, to direct the Chief Executive to prepare a statement of proposal consultation document on the future use of the land located at 17 Summerhay Street, Palmerston North, with repurposing the land for housing as the preferred option. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And if I could just make a few comments. Like most of you that attended the city's inaugural housing summit, the big thing that came across was land, and the cost of land, the supply of land, the rezoning of land. And if it wasn't said once, if it wasn't said twice, if it wasn't said a million times, that is what they're looking at us as council to be doing. So to me, this is a no-brainer. What it looks like thereafter, I'm very open. If it's social housing, if it's market housing, if it's a mixed use, I'm open to any of those ideas, and I think the officers suggested they will, if this is where this goes, they will bring a paper back to us around that. I think this council is absolutely what we need to be doing, so I hope you do support it, and I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, you won't be surprised that I'd be supporting this. I think the site is obviously in the right area of Palmerston for it, but I also think it gives us, being a smaller type section of probably only about 20, it gives us an opportunity to actually, with our urban design and everything, to really do something special on this land and show some of those developers what we can do. So I would actually like to see us really look at a really good urban design site, or whatever you call it, to do something special so that we can show we're leaders in this area.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I'll definitely be supporting this proposal. And one of the things that makes this piece of land suitable, I think, for housing, whereas perhaps others I've not been so keen about, is that this isn't really suitable as a reserve. It's blocked off from the streets. It doesn't have a kind of a good safety feel about it because it's blocked in. And it hasn't had, apart from people who use it for bowling, it hasn't had public access as a reserve for any length of time. So I feel that it's a piece of land that, because of the way that the bowling clubs have amalgamated, has now become available to us, and it would be remiss of us not to use it for housing. And so I strongly support, and I urge you all to support it too. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly supportive of this, but a few comments that do arise. One is, I think, as we look at the package between here and the Albert Street Depot, we should be considering opportunities there to provide some reserve space in where there is a bit of a gap now. Secondly, wanted to comment, several times in the paper there was statements around maximising revenue. And I'm a little bit cautious about us as a council sort of thinking and talking in that space, because that's sort of what the developers do, you know, like, let's let them do that. And let's have our conversation about maximising social value and the sorts of things that Councillor Beattie was just referring to in terms of some good demonstration of what can be done with good design to provide leadership in that space for the development community. You can see where we may not actually be maximising revenue, but we are maximising the benefit to the community. And finally, to say, you know, for me, the question of seeing it slip out of public ownership is one of concern. This is a public asset that has been a public asset in this city and has gained value as a public asset in this city for a very long time, and I would like to see us continue to hold on to the land. I realize that's a decision yet to come, but just making that statement early that this is public property and it should stay as such. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hapata.
Just a quick comment to say that SWAT Manawatu did a good job in doing the bowling club merger, so well done on them doing that in the first instance. And I do think that this is a great initiative for the council to turn this into housing, so well done on that, on turning this reserve and this one into housing. I think it's going to be, don't mind how it ends up and where it ends up and what it looks like, but I think from turning this reserve into housing, I think this is a good job done.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along with others, I agree with most of the comments that have been made. I don't think it's suitable as a reserve. I definitely think it's suitable for housing. I'm quite keen to repurpose the land for housing, but definitely don't want to sell it. So putting it out there, straight off the bat, we shouldn't be selling off the last bits of land that we actually kind of own.
Thank you, councillors. I don't think we were talking about selling it off, but this is about housing and repurposing it in that way. Just want to pick up on the comment of Councillor Harper. Sport Manawatu have created this opportunity with the surrender of that bowling club lease, so that can't go underestimated. And for those of you that have been through that torturous process of dealing with clubs, and Councillor Harper and Councillor Meehan and myself have in recent times, this has opened the door for us. So thank you to Trevor Shaler and his team, especially Brad Cassidy, who's done the hard mahi in getting this over the line. This, again, councillors, a no-brainer. I don't have to remind you of that. Where we go afterwards, let's leave that conversation for a bit later. All right? Ask you to vote. Thank you. That's 16 votes for and none against. We move to number 11. This is around the Cuba Street Stage 2 report on further engagement. And before we come to that, we have to move that off the table. And I'll be asking you councillors not to do that at this stage, and there's a couple of reasons why. You will have seen some late correspondence to us yesterday, and from one of our people that has spoken to this council before. And look, if it had been just that, I would have been quite happy to have led this process. I went down there this morning to talk to a few people, and I just believe there needs to be a little bit more consultation done. Very happy to recommend and bring this forward to the next committee council meeting. We haven't got everybody on the same page, and we have some that are quite negative, and we just need to bring everybody together. We had a meeting which council officers asked me to lead, and I know officers, there's some new officers involved, but the portfolio leader for City CBD and myself and the Deputy Mayor met with business owners, retailers, and we had a good engagement. We agreed as officers and elected members that we would go back to them in a meeting position. We haven't done that, and I feel we're not bringing everybody with us. We will get some grief out of this if we don't try and bring everybody with us. We're not going to get exactly every retailer, but at the moment we've got 10, and 5 or 6 of them are very reputable operators, including the cycle shop, who would have been one of the main benefactors of this. So I think we've got a little bit more work to do. We'll get there, but I would like us to hold it to that until that consultation is done. So I certainly wouldn't be supporting taking this off the table. You're very welcome to do that, but I won't be endorsing it. If there's a seconder. There is a seconder. Okay, we're going to have a vote to bring it off the table. So it was moved by Councillor Dennison, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Councillor Dennison, do you want to speak to this? No. Right, I'll ask you to vote, please. And that has failed. 6 votes for, 10 against. Right, I'll ask the officers if we could have a discussion about that at a later date, and we look at what we're going to do and coming back to the next committee meeting with some sort of report. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Could you just clarify that if that vote failed, does that not mean that it's on the table?
No, it stays on the table. It's on the table. We have to remove it off the table to allow the officers to speak to their report.
So the wording says to move it off the table and that failed, so does that not mean it's on the table? So I'm a little bit...
It's still on the table, yeah. We move on. Right, number 12 is the district with a big agenda, people, so we're moving on. Number 12, which is a district plan change B, Napier Road Residential Extension Area Operative Report. Who is speaking to this? David, thank you. Page 103 of your papers.
This is an administrative report, so Plan Change B has been through the public consultation process. The Hearings Committee have issued a decision. There was no appeals, so this is just a process of making operative. In terms of the housing supply issue, it is a small step forward, so it rezones a relatively small piece of land down there on Napier Road that emerged as a bit of a challenging area through the district plan review, and we've tidied it up afterwards, so we've rezoned all that land from Sutton Place right through to Roberts Line. So that's where you've got the retirement village, the garden centre, and then some land that's suitable for redevelopment through to Roberts Line. So, but as I said, it's an administrative step and a good step forward in terms of some additional housing supply.
David, before I go to some of the other councillors with questions, so, and I understand this is mainly administrative. In terms of, there were some conditions placed on it from the commissioners, was that right, around Oxbows and protected areas, was that?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenging area with the state highway and the Oxbow, and stormwater was a significant issue through the hearing, but there's been a lot of good discussion between the landowners, the council and the infrastructure unit, and we've been continuing to engage with the landowners, and obviously there's been no appeals, so they're comfortable with where all the conditions have landed.
And Horizons?
Yes, Horizons have been privy to that, and they were part of the hearing as well.
Great, thank you. All right, we have other councillors asking questions. Councillor Harper.
I think I was asked and answered. I was going to ask about the stormwater, so you've asked it. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, David. This land adjoins or is adjacent to one of the more dangerous intersections that we've been trying to get resolved over time. Can you give us any update around timings and intentions that we might be aware of from Wakakatahi around Roberts Line and Napier Road?
The latest I've heard is that they're still in detailed design stage. I am meeting with an NZTA senior manager on Friday morning, so I can ask for an update and provide feedback to council.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, David. I'm just interested in knowing the difference between original and further submissions. 12 original and 2 further submissions.
Yeah, so under the RMA for a district plan change or a rezoning proposal, there are 2 rounds of submissions. So there are a first round of submissions where anybody can submit, and then further submissions provide an opportunity for people who are directly affected by an original submission to lodge a further submission in support or opposition. So, for instance, if I submitted and said that hypothetically all the houses in the street you live in should be painted blue, it's a fanciful submission, you would have the opportunity to lodge a further submission saying that you oppose that. So it provides some checks and balances in the submission process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, that's exhausted the questions. Thank you, David. Look, we have 4 recommendations there, councillors. I'm quite happy to move the lot, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, and I will just read them out for the purposes of those online. If I go back to number 1, please. The Council resolves the District Plan Change B, Napier Road Residential Extension Area is approved pursuant to Clause 17 of the first schedule of the Resource Management Act 1991. Number 2, that the approval of the District Plan Change B, Napier Road Residential Extension Area is authorised by affixing the common seal of the City Council. Number 3, that the District Plan Change B, Napier Road Residential Extension Area becomes operative on 21 April 2021 pursuant to Clause 20 of the first schedule of the RMA Act 1991. And number 4, that the resolution to make the District Plan Change B, Napier Road Residential Extension Area operative is publicly notified in accordance with Clause 20 of the first schedule of the RMA Act 1991. That's moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'm not going to speak to it. I think it's been well documented. No others wish to comment. We will vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, moving through to number 13, halfway. Remit proposals from the Palmerston City Council for Local Government New Zealand's AGM meeting 2021. Now there's a memo there on page 107 from Hannah, our governance manager. It's taken as being read, but because of the 2 councillors that brought that forward, namely Councillor Butt, around the
the carbon emissions inventory. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The idea was just to make a homogeneous process for each and every council, just to compare apples with apples. If you see at the inventories at the moment, although there are claims by different councils that they have reduced their emissions in the last few years, but you cannot actually compare the real reductions because the processes are not the same. Some councils are considering sectors differently. For example, I always give the example of waste emissions. If we look at the waste emissions at Palmerston North City Council, they are much bigger than even from the Wellington City Council emissions. So we need to find a way which should make us able to compare the emissions in these sectors by each and every council. Thank you.
That makes sense. It would rely on all our colleagues agreeing. That could be interesting, but at least we'll go some way forward to attempting to do that. So we can come back to what we're going to put there, but Councillor Bowen, you'd like to perhaps speak to the second one, I think?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, but I'll be moving that we seek support from Zone 3, and I think that's what Councillor Butt will do also for item 1. Colleagues, you might remember that I tried to put this up last year and it got a little bit lost in the post-COVID work schedule. It reflects my concern, and I think a concern that was generally shared in the last local body election, about how individual councils take responsibility and take opportunities to promote engagement in electoral participation. And we saw that our CE took a particular view here on what was appropriate for our council, and that was not consistent across the country. That caused a great deal of discussion and some concern. And in reflecting on how that would be resolved, it seemed to me an appropriate way to do that would be to involve the Electoral Commission in having that responsibility, rather than it sitting with individual CEs across the country. So that is what this remit to local government seeks to put forward, that we change that authority from sitting with local councils into giving it to the Electoral Commission. This sits clearly in a stream of work that Local Government New Zealand is already considering. I know the Mayor has spoken to us with that in Councillor Only, with his role in the National Council there. So it's not unsurprising. It's possibly a little late because it should have come forward last year, but I think it does provide an opportunity for this council to say that we think this could be done better if it was more centralised. Thank you.
Would you like to move and perhaps second, you both of you?
Yes.
And so we would strike out does not seek on both of them. Okay. I'll open it up for any other questions and or comments. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a brief comment. I'm certainly strongly in support of both. But the point that I wanted to add was around the first, in that the LGNZ's actual submission recently to the Climate Change Commission actually raised this very point around the current inventory work being pretty messy. So I think really this just simply backs up actually where LGNZ is trying to go, and I think if we can help demonstrate a mandate through TLAs, it'll just be that much stronger a case they'll be able to put. So urge colleagues to support both.
Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just briefly to say I support both of them. In terms of the inventory standards and reduction targets, I think we're in a little bit of a sort of a Wild West era with them, where people can kind of do what they like and make any kind of a claim. And if we're genuinely going to see movement in carbon reduction, we need to be sure that we're all doing it, because otherwise decisions that we might make as a council, if the council up the road is doing something different, then we're just going to disadvantage ourselves necessarily compared to them. So support that one. And the second one, I mean, I think it is an issue that local government has to sort of contract separately to have its own electoral participation done. and something that we raised with the Minister when we visited Parliament as a group. And I think it would be good to get support from this through LGNZ, as well as lobbying separately, because ultimately the Electoral Commission has a lot more mana with people than individual electoral organisations servicing individual councils. And participation is something that we would like to see improved, voting participation. And I think if there were national campaigns to encourage people to vote in local government elections, it would be much more effective than every single council having to do it for themselves. So support both of them. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm absolutely happy to support both. And I guess our council's been particularly strong in bringing forward remits to LGNZ, certainly over the time that I've been on council. And when we were down in Wellington and met with the Minister, and I did ask questions around the value that certainly central government placed on this as a mechanism of sort of putting forward our wishes, I guess, and it was confirmed that this is still there's still value in this process. So yes, happy to support both. Just on the first resolution, I stood in for the Mayor at the Regional Chiefs meeting recently and mentioned it during a conversation on climate action for the first Joint Climate Action Committee meeting, and I guess the emissions inventory is something that certainly councils in our area are wanting to do if they haven't started that work already, but also, as Councillor Johnson put it, they're in the Wild West as well, and they're trying to grapple with what they include and what they don't include, and how they really define a benchmark. So regardless of what happens with this remit in particular, through the Local Government New Zealand process, that forum has already asked that this remit specifically be shared with them if it passes through our council today, and in particular there's some work going around sharing what inventories have already been pulled together from various councils and looking at what possible alignment we can actually at least achieve locally. So the idea behind the first resolution has got a lot of merit and is already, I guess there's already a willingness to engage in that at a local level. But of course, we know that there's huge value in being able to benchmark ourselves across councils nationally as well. So yeah, happy to support that, and I think they'll both be well supported by other councils as well.
All right, I'll go back for right of reply to you, Councillor Bowen, if you need it. I don't think you do. All right, we can vote, please, councillors. Councillor Dennison. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. All right, we'll attempt to get through one more. Number 14, which is the allocation of committee and portfolio responsibilities. We have a memo on page 115 from our governance manager, Hannah. I'll take that as being read, and it's on page 115, where am I? 115. So there's two resolutions there. Now, as you will note, that this was part of an agreed review we did, just around people's portfolio responsibilities, allocations of committees, just making sure that everybody was where they wanted to be, or if they wanted to be moved. Look, choices were collated, and thank you for those that do come back with stuff. We circulated that. There were comments sought, and we got one or two comments. And of course, we had a new councillor, and Councillor Michelad coming on board. And I'd have to say we've done our best to try and allocate wishes where people wanted to go. It's fair to say, look, there's some greater portfolios with a lot of people in there, and I agree that there's probably
possibly more than that is needed in some of those areas. But look, it was people's or councillors' wishes to be part of those groups. So some will do perhaps more mahi than others, if that's the way we want to phrase it, but you're all involved. So my recommendations are as what people really wanted. So look, I've got the two recommendations up there, that the council approves the Mayor's recommendations for council and membership of committees as identified in section 3 of the report dated the 7th of April 2021, titled The Allocation of Committee and Portfolio Responsibilities, and that council approves the Mayor's recommendation for council and membership of portfolios as identified in section 4 of the report dated 7th of April 2021, entitled Allocation of Committee and Portfolio Responsibilities. I'll look to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up if there's any questions or comments. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a brief comment on the disestablishment of the defence portfolio. To note that that signals absolutely no change to how we currently do business in that space. The strategic relationships are held by the Mayor in his official capacity, and they will continue to be a very important part of how we do business in this city. The activity that's fallen within that sits within my remit as Chair of Arts, Culture and Heritage, because we look after commemorative events, which means that I have responsibility there for things like the Armistice and Anzac Day ceremonies and how Council interacts there. So I'll continue to attend those meetings and the Palmerston North Defence Heritage Advisory Group as normal. So business will continue as usual. There'll just be one less report to write, read and receive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's actually a very good segue. I mean, it's very poignant that we acknowledge the Defence with Anzac Day just around the corner, and of course our special relationship with NZ Defence Force and their charter parade in the city, and to other councillors that attend other services in villages, Councillor Petrinas with Bunnythorpe and Deputy Mayor in Ashurst. So, being no further comments, we'll vote, please. Thank you, councillors. That's 16 votes for, none against. Look, I'll leave we still have a little bit to go. I'll adjourn the meeting now and ask you to be back here. We'll give you a little bit longer today at 1:30, and we will recommence at 1:30. Thank you.